Who's got another tier list video for you? If you guessed me, you were right, but you probably already clicked on the video, so you know that. Anyway, we're going to be ranking all of the counters, the counter spells in Dimir, whether that be Murktide, Oculus, Death Shadow, whatever the case may be. Going to be ranking them based on their effectiveness and doing the job that I want them to do, whether or not that job is good in current and modern, and how kind of effective they are to pushing our overall game plan forward. So there's going to be a few little subjective points here and there that we'll get to whenever we get to that card. But first off, let's break down our tier list and go over our rules for the video. First off, to be included on the list, every card has to fit 3 criteria. First off, it has to interact on the stack. I'm not including anything like petty theft that bounces a spell, but it doesn't have to be a counter necessarily, which you'll see a few here like Sink into Stupor, Subtlety I've got on the list that interact with something on the stack, even if they don't say counter on them. Number 2, it has to be a blue or a black spell. Most of these, all of them are going to be at least partly blue. But I'm not including things like Dovin's Veto or Frilled Mystic, something like that, that gets outside of the Dimir color spectrum. I really want to keep it like blue-black base, and then if you want to expand on the list later with your own inclusions, you're more than welcome to do so. And then rule number 3, it has to be a card that I have played, and preferably something that I've played recently, but there are a few others that I included in the list because I think that I can evaluate them pretty well in current modern. Either I've played the card enough, I've played against it recently, and played it myself previously, but I just feel like I have a good grasp on what the card can do in the current modern environment. So did include a couple of those. But other than that, let's go ahead and jump into the rankings. See if we can maybe throw some curveballs at you. Just to go over the tier list itself a little bit here. We've got 4 categories. I started to kind of get to more than that and realized that the 4 I had really summed up everything. The very top tier is the best of the best. These are the counters that are the best at doing the job that they're designed to do. They're the best in current modern. They really encompass like what it means to be counter magic in today's environment. The best at stopping your opponent from doing something that they're in the deck to stop. We'll get a little more into that as we get to some of the specific spells. The second tier, this green tier up here, making most lists. These are counters that might not be the best thing available, but you're more than likely playing them because they do something really well or something that you really want access to. The third tier, the solid role fillers. These are the things that you might play every week. You might not. You might bring them out of your trade binder if you expect a certain meta or you're wanting to tier a little bit more towards a certain matchup, things like that. And then the fourth tier, resolves. These are kind of the counters that I don't plan on picking up anytime soon. There might just be enough stuff ahead of it on the list that they don't make it out of the trade binder. It might be that enough stuff does a better job of that specific role than it does. And it's just not something that I feel is either A, impactful enough to warrant consideration, or B, not good enough at doing that job compared to the other options you have ahead of it. So without further ado, let's jump into some rankings. All right, so all of the cards we have in the list are in alphabetical order. So if you're wanting to find me talk about a specific card on here, you can kind of scroll down the timeline on the video, find some stuff that's on the list that's around where you were looking alphabetically, and can probably find the breakdown of that card. just like the threat video, we're going to be doing kind of an evaluation of everything as we hit it to come up with a final stance for it. So there's going to be a lot of talking points about several of these. But anyway, let's kick off the video. We've got right down below, you've got the card preview pane from Magic Online. So you'll be able to see and read exactly what card I'm going over as I go over them. So first off, alphabetically, Annul, 1 blue instant, counter target artifact or enchantment spell. So we played Annul a little bit when the Orzhov deck started popping up, because it hit not only the Overlord of the Baelmerk, hit Aether Vial, hit Relic of Progenitus, but it doubled as a little extra hit against the Breach decks, hitting Underworld Breach, hitting pretty artifacts. I'd say pretty much. It hit all of the artifacts. The issue that I had with Annul is it really falls off in effectiveness. You don't have like one of these key targets to hit. So, for example, if you've got an Annul against an Overlord of the Baelmerk, it looks really good to annul an Overlord, like on the draw, your opponent's turn 2, you've got 1 land in play. But then the next game, they have Ophelia into a Tetramos or something, and you're sitting here with this Annul just doing absolutely nothing. So you have the chance to board it in to take out like a specific piece, and if they don't see that piece but still have a functional hand, Annul is absolutely worthless. I think the only reason to get some consideration is because Overlord of the Baelmerk is a creature and not just an enchantment. So fortunately, stuff like Negate or Stubborn Denial can't hit it effectively. But I think that Annul is definitely not best of the best. Definitely not making most lists. I don't even personally have it as solid role filler. I'm putting Annul in it resolves. Like, you can have it in your deck or have it in your trade binder, but I think the only thing I would ever board Annul in for is if Overlord of the Baelmerk just got like insanely more popular, and in which case I would probably still go with other options before I went with Annul. So it falls into that category of, I think there's just so much better. But let's move on. Number 2, we got Archmage's Charm, the 3 blue instant that can counter a spell, target player draws 2 cards, or gain control of target non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. So that third mode was really fun when Hammer Time was more popular. Unfortunately, that matchup has kind of fallen off the face of the earth, so not a lot to base off of there. The counterspell mode, obviously really good. 3 mana is a bit much. I've pointed out my disdain for 3 mana spells in general in a lot of the Frog lists. I think that there's a lot of fast, not only combo decks, but fast decks you need to interact with early and often in Modern right now. And a 3 mana spell, especially on the draw and some of their starts, just ends up being a dead piece of cardboard. There are some like Mako starts out of Hollow One that Archmage's Charm looks really good. If we see Affinity make a bit of a comeback, then Charm could have a little more usefulness, be able to steal a construct just to slow things down. So I'm going to put Archmage's Charm in probably the role fillers, like middle to lower part of the role fillers, but in the role fillers in general. I think that it's a light off. I think that it's a really cool card. I think it's got metas that are slower that having the option to get a little card advantage into turn is nice. Just think the current modern meta is like a little too fast to really take you. So I'll leave it in the role fillers. For 3, ceremonious rejection. I had so many metas of Shadow and like early Dimir days where it's just 4 ceremonious rejection in the sideboard because I refused to lose to Tron if I could avoid it. Now we have cast triggers. And cast triggers are kind of a nightmare. So ceremonious rejection has been pushed really, really far down the ranking. I don't even know if I'd put ceremonious rejection in full fillers anymore. Because you've got your 4 consigned to memory. Then once you get past that and your 4 counter spell and 3 or 4 force of negation, like another counter a spell isn't really helping you. Yeah, I think I got to put it in it resolves with like ahead of a null. Just it's like the 5th or 6th best thing at doing what it does. So it's like behind consigned to memory, obviously, behind counterspell, because counterspell can hit malevolent rumble. It's behind force of negation because unless you're dealing with, or unless you're okay letting the cast trigger go, then force and consign are basically hitting the same things, but force lets you tap out, play a threat on turn 2, or ceremonious rejection doesn't. So it's like Karn and Talismans, Kozilek's command. It's the only thing against. So yeah, I think it resolves is fine. I could see moving it up to solid role filler towards the bottom if the Tron / Eldrazi decks or whatever move towards like 4 Karn or Karn the Great Creator, 4 app, or Kozilek's command, like enough colorless spells without cast triggers, then I can see ceremonious rejection. But until that happens, I think at resolves tier is change the equation. The 1 in a blue counter target spell with mana value 2 or less, or counter a red or green spell with value 6 or less. Kind of like the upgraded, was it Aether Gust? That Gust could bounce a permanent. Really change the equation is like good against Titan, the Amulet Titan deck. Kind of subpar against basically everything else. Could bring it in against Zoo and be okay because it's like Kavu, Ragavan, Tribal Flames, Flage, Uba Brawler. About it. So I think like Zoo and Amulet would be the best matchups for it. And even then are both kind of mid. I guess you could bring it in against Boros, but it's a 2 mana counterspell, so it's just like strictly worse than actual counterspell. So I think I'm gonna leave it in resolves as well. I'm gonna put it ahead of a null, below ceremonious rejection. I think that the stuff that you would want change the equation against is less popular than the stuff you'd want ceremonious rejection. And I don't think it does as good of a job of dealing with those decks as rejection does against colorless stuff. pretty happy. And just to make sure we're on the same page, the left side for y'all of the tier list is the closest to getting upgraded. So like Ceremonious Rejection is at the top of the bottom tier, closest to getting moved up to the third tier. Consign to memory, like easy here. It's the best thing we have at answering cast triggers. It's about the only thing keeping Eldrazi in check somewhat. You see Eldrazi decks, you see energy decks like Splashing Blue for Consign or Eldrazi. It also has a lot of usefulness coming in against like Scion of Draco, Leyline Binding out of Zoo. You can bring it in against the Blink decks to hit something that Felia exiles or Flicker Wisp exiles, stop an ETB from like a Solitude, whatever the case may be. So really, really versatile, as well as doing the thing that you want it to do, which is fight Eldrazi better than any other counter we have access to against them. So I think there's no dispute that it should be in like S tier. I think at the time of making this video, it's the most played card in Modern, period. We've got the new Ugin that just came out, and I can't imagine Consign dipping with that thing around. Yeah, I think Consign and S tier, pretty easy. Counterspell, actual factual counterspell. So first off, it's like a 4 of in pretty much every frog list. There are some Oculus lists that are lower on counterspell. I know some other players were playing lists around for a little while that were on counterspell, going to like 3 copies, 2 copies, whatever. I do think that had something to do with their consistency falling off. Like, you just need that ability to get a threat, land a couple counters to protect it, or kind of time walk your opponent while you close the game out. So having actual factual counterspell is a really big deal. I'll put it, I wish there were like a little bit of a gap. I want to put it best of the best because obviously it displaced like every other 2-mana counter in Modern. No argument there. But you do also have to consider that counterspell itself isn't the most efficient answer in Modern at the moment. You'll have a lot of 1-mana stuff. You have Urza's Saga. You have cast triggers. So I wish I could put this like on the line between best of the best and making most lists. But I think for the fact that it's kind of like displaced everything else, got to put it in best of the best. So good. It does everything. If there's a decent amount of stuff in Modern that doesn't care about it. Oh man. So I told you I dug pretty deep coming up with this. I wanted to make sure I had enough cards on here to make an interesting video, but it had to be stuff that I've played, and I've cast quite a few counter spells, as much as I hate to admit it publicly. Counter Squall, unfortunately, kind of fell off with Snapcaster Mage. The little extra damage on your negation, cool 5, 6, 7 years ago. Since then, and since Snapcaster fallen out of favor, Counter Squall unfortunately has to. I love the card. I wish I could play it. maybe one day things will slow down just like a little bit more and we can discuss it. But I also think there's just way better options with things like that. So Counter Squall also coming down to the resolves. I'll put it ahead of Change the Equation, still lower than Ceremonious Rejection because I think Counter Squall is like more um, has more targets than Change the Equation, but I don't think there's a chance I'm ever. If I have a slot and I'm like, I want negate in the slot, I would register Counter Squall instead. But spoiler alert, when I get to negate, probably not putting it very high either. Got delay next, which I wanted to include because we had that meta for a while of the Uro decks, Uro Omnath, Teferi, Jace, and delay was really, really fun to stop an Uro from coming back on its escape and just like throw it off into no man's land for a few turns. We also got to delay a lot of Balustrade spies and the informers out of Oops All Spells, some Charbelchers. It was a fun meta if you were playing like Grixis Shadow, outside of the Uro part. All the other unfair non-creature stuff. It was pretty sweet against. But unfortunately, delay is like, well, I'll still put it ahead of a null. Actually, I'll put it below a null. Sorry, a null. I kind of disrespected you. I can come up with some obscure corner case where I want a null, like I said, the Overlord, but I cannot come up with an equation or a situation that I want delay. So it's pretty rough down there. Next, Painful Stroke. Another one of these counters with Ceremonious Rejection that were really good against Eldrazi, really good into the big mana stuff. And a lot of that's really fallen off. Or it's not even that it's fallen off, it's that it's not as good as it was against those decks. Eldrazi picked up a lot of cast triggers. So even if you counter their Devourer, if you lose your Frog or your Murktide, it doesn't do you much good. Titan's kind of the same way. Like you can still counter a Titan, and that's really cool. But now you have to worry about things like Spelunking and Aftermath Analyst and Green Suns for one of the small creatures, and all this stuff that just like ignores Disdainful Stroke altogether. So, oh, and all the big expensive stuff has an alternate cost to make it cheaper. So, are you holding up Disdainful Stroke for a Murktide Regent with Delve and missing everything else? Are you casting it into an Evoked Solitude or an Impending Overlord or whatever the case may be? So I think I'm going to put Disdainful Stroke below Ceremonious Rejection, ahead of Counter Squall. I'm actually thinking about moving Counter down, but I think I'll leave it where it is. I think it's not as good as Rejection against the big mana or the Eldrazi / Tron decks, but maybe something comes up in the future, like some ramp decks pick up popularity. They involve 4 or 5 cast cards and Disdainful Strokes playable again. Probably not, but I have a little more higher hope for Stroke being playable than some of the other options. Back to playability. Drown in the Lock. Drown. Drown just got like displaced by Frog. Psychic Frog getting printed was such a blessing for Dimir and a curse. We lost one of our most versatile spells. He picked up Frog, which is obviously phenomenal, but losing Drown hurts my heart. We just trophied with Drown in the Lock like a week ago. So I don't think I'm legally allowed to put it too far down the list. Definitely not the best of the best. It's definitely not making most lists. But I think I can put it in role filler status. I think if you've got like a flex spot in your main deck, 1 or 2 slots, and you're not expecting a lot of Eldrazi or Frog, I think the card's really, really good. But if you walk into a room and it's just all cast triggers or all harbingers and frogs and murktides, ground's going to be pretty rough. But I was happy when I played it. I think the graveyard hate is going down a good bit. So I'm going to put Drown in the role fillers. And I do think it's ahead of Archmage's Charm, which is more a nod to how much I hate the 3 mana active spells. Charm, I still think is like good. I just think Drown has a higher chance of making my deck list than Charm. Got Lair of Denial. This one's interesting. So when I'm evaluating these cards, I'm going off of the premise, and we kind of talked about this in the threat video. I'm going off the premise that you're building around this card. So you're playing Flare of Denial with a package of creatures to sack to Flare of Denial. So like Philology Archaeologist, Thunder Trap Trainer, Cameo, which I'll add an aside here. Please do not play Flare of Denial in your list that only has like Tameo, Psychic Frog, Murktide, because you never want to sack off any of those. It looks really awful when you like have to stop a spell from resolving, and the only way is to flare, sack off your Psychic Frog, but you sack it off and you just lose the game because you no longer have a Psychic Frog. So if you want to sack off a Philology Archaeologist, go for it. If you want to sack off a Thunder Trap, go for it. If you want to sack off a Tameo or a Psychic Frog, play a different deck. But as far as rating, going off the understanding that you've built your deck to make use of Flare of Denial, then I think it's making most lists that can run it. So if you're running Archaeologist, you're probably running Flare of Denial. I don't want to say the best of the best because it is situational. You do need a threat on board to sack off, which is a non-zero cost, but it is really good and it's really efficient. The fact that you can sack stuff off on your own turn is really positive. So yeah, I'm putting it in most lists and assuming that you're running like heavy Archaeologist Thunder Trap. Flusterstorm. Flusterstorm has really, really fallen off recently. Not that I think it's gotten worse. It's just the current direction of Modern is not favorable for Flusterstorm. There was a really good sweet spot for it not that long ago when like Eldrazi was coming along, creativity was around, Storm was really popular, and we were going through leagues of just like Flusterstorming Storm out of the game, and then the next game we're Flusterstorming a Kozilek's command, because your opponent always taps out when they've got a Kozilek's command, so Flusterstorm's just like Ceremonies Rejection 5 through whatever. Or hitting creativity against the creativity decks. So I gotta put it in role fillers. I actually think I'm putting it ahead of Drown in the Lock. I think if your meta is like I said, heavy Storm, maybe you've got creativity in your meta, whatever, then I do think Flusterstorm is a does a better job of fulfilling its role against the decks that you want it against than Drown does as like a flex spot. That makes any sense. Like, I think Drown is a good flex spot, but I think Flusterstorm against the deck you want to have access to Flusterstorm against, it does a more impactful job of righting the ship and getting you in better shape than Drown. Up next is Force of Negation. Probably best of the best. Like, I'm going to put it below Counterspell because having to pitch is a cost, like a very real cost in a deck that doesn't have sort of way to like regain that card advantage or card disadvantage outside of hitting with Frog. But you've cast Force Negation and hit like an amulet on the draw against a Titan, or a map on the draw against Tron, or tapped out for a frog and gotten to force some removal spell to keep your frog alive, you realize just how busted this card is. And actually talking through it, I'm going to move it ahead of actual Counterspell on my list. I think Force is one of, if not like the reason, not the reason, one of the reasons play Frog was being able to play a Frog, hold up Force on your opponent's turn. They go for Fatal Push or Prismatic Ending or what, because, oh, you're tapped out. I want to go for my removal spell now. And you get to force that, untap, open mana, attack with Frog. It's just a whole new level of Splinter Twin, of comboing your opponent right then and there to basically win the game. I don't think it's as impactful as Ceremonious Rejection, but it is absolutely a card that I don't think you can afford to cut all the copies of. And it makes a noticeable difference when you have one versus when you don't. Just that safety net of being able to tap out and not, or know you're not going to die there. Deal. Invasive Surgery. So this is in the realm with like Test of Talents, is these counters that have the surgical effect on them. Unfortunately, Invasive Surgery has got the additional need of needing Delirium, which Dimir, outside of the like Nethergoyf, Street Wraith, Mishra's Bauble builds, Dimir's just never getting Delirium online. So it's going to be an it resolves. It's going to be pretty low on the list, like low and null, ahead of delay. It does have specific cases. Maybe you've got a meta of all Living End and Rhinos and creativity and running a list with Nethergoyf and can get Delirium. Other than that, you're probably not running. So low on the list. Minor Misstep. Played Minor Misstep a few times, not too long ago. Mostly for Boros, being able to hit the Ocelot Pride, Ragavan, Galvanic Discharge, Static Prison, all really solid. You can hit things like Living End or Rhinos because it does save mana value 1 or less. I really wish Minor Misstep said counter target spell if 1 or less mana was spent to cast it. So like you can counter evoke elementals with it. That would have made this card easy A tier. But as it is, I think it's a solid role filler. I think if you've got a meta that's chock full of a bunch of Boros or living in, something like that, you can find an argument for it. I think it's below Drown, below Archmage's Charm, but there's definitely like a grouping of decks that this card is about the most efficient thing you can do against to have a very good impact. Up is Mystic. Kind of like Counterspell. I wish I could put Mystical Dispute between making most lists and solid role fillers. I think Dispute is a really, really good card, but it runs into a bit of trouble because it's good in the blue mirrors, and a lot of times the blue mirrors are coming down to like the game getting dragged out, making land drops. That makes Dispute worse. So it's better than Flusterstorm, right? Am I just putting it in? It's either the very like bottom of A tier or the very top of B tier. I think I've got to put it top of B tier. Well, I'm going to put it bottom of A tier because of the matchups that I've seen recently. I've seen a lot of the Dimir mirror. I've seen a lot of Is It Wizards. I've seen Splinter Twin. I've seen a lot of blue affinity lists, and Mystical Disputes like really, really good against all of those. So I'm going to take that into account here and say to keep its spot in A tier because of like what's popular in the modern metagame. Next up is Negate. We already pretty well discussed that. I've got Counter Squall down in like D tier. Negate, I think, is just worse Counter Squall. Obviously, the mana is a consideration, not having to have the black mana to cast the Negate, but mana in Modern so good right now. Not really worried about the casting cost. I'm going to put Negate down here with like Delay. A little bit higher than Delay just because less times it's going to be dead, but to shrink window a little bit because I don't want to run out of room in the bottom of my tier. I think I can resize this. Oh. Next up, we have got Remand. And a really fun one. Obviously, if you've played a lot of Vintage Cube, you know the power of Remand. If you haven't played a lot of Vintage Cube, you probably still know the power of Remand. I don't think there is... I probably should just like add... I think I'm going to here. I think we're going to add a tier on the fly. Add a row below. This will save us a little bit of... Give us a little bit of space here. Last tier to be gray. This tier is going to be Counterspell. So this is just like the tier for stuff that got replaced by Counterspell. So Disdainful Stroke, Counter Squall, Negate, probably change the equation, probably delay. These are just the counters. I'll keep changing the equation. We'll figure that part out. These are just the counters that Counterspell came along and said, you know what? I do this job better. All these like 2-mana counters, situational, thought they were efficient, and then Counterspell came along and was just like, you know, we're all these. It's a really long list. I don't even have Logic Knot and Mana Leak and those on here, but you know that they're in this category. Also, you're just going to have to deal with the fact that spelling of Counterspell. Heck yeah. All right, we no longer have misspelled Counterspell. Yeah, Remand, super cool card. Wish it were better in current modern. Unfortunately, it's not. Maybe Snapcaster picks up play again if Endurance gets banned in the future, but then probably not. Getting to super. So this is like the first card we have on the list where I mentioned there is some stack-based interaction. Doesn't say counter, but it does everything you kind of want a counter to do. It says the thing you're trying to resolve this turn. Obviously, there's going to be matchups like Cast Trigger Eldrazi where it's less effective at that. But the fact that it doubles as a land is a really nice bonus. So I think I'm putting it best of the best as well. Low counter spell. I think it's ahead of A tier because if you're playing a predominantly blue based deck with counter spells, you're running like 1 to 3. Some people run 4 Sink into Stupor. It's just too flexible not to run. Especially when you start saying, oh, this is in place of a land, not even in place of another. I think it sinks pretty easy S tier. If you agree, that's fine. But my list, my rules. Up, we have got Spell Pierce, Zendikar Staple, counter non-creature spell unless it's control. Not making most lists, but I do think it's a role filler. I think Spell Pierce has seen enough play where I'm comfortable bringing it with me to tournaments. That's kind of how I judge things. Like, would I put this card in my carry-on to fly to an event? And Spell Pierce is yes. I've got it in my trade binder, or not even my trade binder, like my playables binder to go with me to any event because I always love having the chance to register Spell Pierce. And unfortunately, things are getting like more and more efficient. So it looks worse than it has in the past. Probably putting it like bottom of role fillers. Got Force Negation and Counter Spell and Mystical Dispute, Ceremonious Rejection, Sign of Memory, not Ceremony. That are all kind of hitting the same stuff Pierces, but either making them pay more or they can't pay or whatever the case may be. But if we enter like another spell heavy meta at some point, come back. Or if there's another non-creature combo deck that we want to fight over that doesn't have Mox Opal. spell Air. Gotta be S tier or A tier. Just because of the amount that it sees play. I do think Spell Snare is a lot lower on my list than it has been previously. I think that there's just like too many decks migrating away from the 2-drops. And then Breach getting banned, obviously a big detriment to Spell Snare. But it is really good into Boros. It's really good into the FrogTide mirror. There's still a lot of like malevolent rumbles running around. Dogmoth. Yeah, I think I'm putting it making most lists. I think I'm putting it ahead of Flare. I don't think it's like impactful enough by itself. S tier. But don't have to sack something off, unlike Flare. You get to like tempo counter stuff, especially if you open up a hand and you've got a Spell Snare, you're on the draw, you're never upset at keeping that hand, right? Like assuming functional mana, a FrogTide or something down the road, but you have a Spell Snare on the draw, get to counter a Thopter Foundry or an opposing frog, and you just feel like phenomenal. Yeah, I think I'm keeping it. Another fun of that I put on here, Spell Stutter Sprite. We obviously played some fairies before on the stream. We played Spell Stutter once or twice in Shadow when, I want to say when Prismatic Ending H2 came out. Like flash in, counter something against, what's it called? Is it? You got to Spell Stutter some Rhinos, some Living Ends, Force Negation it. I wish I could say it was a role filler. Definitely it resolves because it does something better than Counterspell, which is counter Rhinos and Living End, even if they have Force of Negation. So it's got a role. It's not the best role filler. It's not solid as the role filler, but it does have a specific role. So I think I'm putting it above a null, below change the equation. I think it's got more of a role, or is better at its role, and has a wider reaching and a role than a null. But I don't think it's as versatile as a card as change the equation. I don't think I can put it ahead of that. It's really just Rhinos Living End. What is it? A Glimpse of Tomorrow shows up, then break out your Spell Stutters for Glimpse of Tomorrow. Next up is Stern Scolding. Stern Scolding, the 1 blue counter creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. Well, I think we all know it's going either S tier or A tier. Which one? I kind of want to put it S tier because hitting Psychic Frog, hitting Solitude was a really big deal. Hitting Aftermath Analyst, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, like everything out of Boros. Yeah, I think I'm putting it S tier, but the bottom of S tier. There's still matchups that it's completely dead. So Eldrazi, it's really not good against Amulet, but you might bring in a copy or two if you got the space. I get against Storm. But I think there's enough good matchups to keep it S tier. I could see the top of A tier, and maybe I should. Yeah, I'm going to move it to the top of A tier solely because I think that the cards in S tier either have a much higher floor, so Counterspell, Sink into Stupor have way higher floors, and then Force and Consign are so good at what they want to be good against. So, like, Force being good against unfair stuff, especially on the draw, allowing you to tap out for Frog. Sign being so good at stopping whatever the Eldrazi decks are doing, or hating on like Saga, Leyline Binding, Scion. I think keeps those in S tier, but Stern Scolding, it's good against the stuff it's good against, but it does have a lot of matchups that you're just like not interested in bringing it at all. So I think that keeps it here for me. It's more versatile than a Spell Snare. Stubborn Denial. Like I said, I am including some stuff we played in Shadow in this list, and we're going off the assumption that we're building with this card in mind. So we're building a deck that wants to get ferocious, wants to have access to Stubborn Denial. So I've got to put it above like Negate and Counter Squall. I think it's a role filler. I think it's right around Pierce and Minor Misstep. I think I put it above Minor Misstep, below Archmage's Charm. And I think Stub and Charm are like pretty interchangeable. Stub, if you're wanting a non-creature counter or don't mind a non-creature counter in your Shadow deck or your Nethergoyf deck, you can even enable it with Frog or Murktide. It's like the best negate those kind of decks. But it doesn't stop Solitude, which is a big issue. Doesn't stop like Overlord of the Baelmerc, Primeval Titan, Aftermath Analyst. Stops a little bit in Boros. Yeah, I think overall in a vacuum, it's lower power level than Archmage's Charm. I think if you build with it in mind, it's pretty close. But the versatility of Charm, I think, outweighs a little bit. Keep Stub in the role fillers. Oh, what's next? Subtlety, looks like. Yep, another one of these not actually countering, but stops the thing from resolving this turn. So we give it like honorary counter status. I think Subtlety for me is like A or B tier. I know it's not making S tier. I think I'm going B tier. I think I'm going very top of B tier because there's a lot of matchups and a lot of times I'm boarding Subtlety out. And I've said plenty of times on stream and in other videos that I think there's a good number of matches that the best thing about Subtlety is being a 4-mana flash 3/3 flyer. So it's got like that floor to it, which I think keeps it in B tier. But the fact that there's a lot of matchups like Eldrazi that you don't want Subtlety against, or matchups like Boros where you want Subtlety, but if you have to Subtlety something early, you're really falling behind on cards to not actually solve the problem. That can make things a little more complicated further down the road. Don't blame people that have been trimming on Subtlety. I think it's Really, really good against Solitude and Overlord of the Baelmerc. Good against things like Scion of Draco on the draw. Good against FrogTide. Same time, like the card is not the answer you want most often than not against those things. You'd rather have a hard counter than a subtlety. We'll keep it at the top of B tier. Summary dismissal. Ugh. I tried it. So expensive. Eldrazi's like casting their stuff before summary dismissal resolves. So I'm definitely putting it in E tier. Probably null and invasive surgery. I can make an argument for it, which gotta buff it to some extent. The argument's not very good, so it doesn't get very high out of D tier. Better options, which we haven't even gotten to on the current list. Yeah, we're keeping it in D tier. I think it's one that you're probably not taking. You might bring it in your trade binder, but you're not realistically registering it. Tails End, counter target, activated ability, triggered ability, or legendary spell. So Tails End was another one that we had against Eldrazi previous. Countering things like Ugin the Spirit Dragon, or Eldrazi /Tron. Counting things like Ugin the Spirit Dragon, Karn Liberated, Karn the Great Creator, cast trigger off Ulamog. Not as good as Ceremonious Rejection, obviously. I don't think it's as good as, or it's not as good as Consigned to Memory, obviously. I don't think it's as good as Ceremonious Rejection either. So, probably just putting it down here close to Summary Dismissal. Like, not any matchups in current Modern where I'm like, oh, I want Tails End. But we're getting ready to go into a potential Modern metagame where Eldrazi is a little bit buffed. So I think I'm okay keeping it relatively in the trade box, the maybe board. Tested Talents. Tested Talents like right there with Invasive Surgery. It's another one of these counter and instant or sorcery, surgical, all the copies. Invasive Surgery only hits sorcery, but Tested Talents hits instant or sorcery. Unfortunately, we only have two options for this. It's either put it right above Invasive Surgery, because actually, I'd put it higher than that. I'd put it like Spell Stutter status. Getting stuff over one CMC is better for Tested Talents. Getting the surgical is better. I don't think there's anything in the current meta. I don't think there's anything in the current meta that I really want Tested Talents against, but we've seen points where creativity, living end, rhinos, those kind of stuff became popular, and Tested Talents is a good, but definitely not the premier choice. If I didn't put it in D tier, kind of around Ceremonious Rejection, I'd probably put it in the counterspell replacement tier. It's another like 2-mana counterspell. Realistically, Spell Stutter could be, or talked about the force negation dodge, but like Tested Talents is the the next one, it's just, oh, it's a 2-mana counterspell, but does miss some stuff. Below counterspell, replaced by counterspell. Got Tishana's Tidebinder. Ability doesn't necessarily counterspell. With the rise or potential rise in Eldrazi, I've had a lot of people in the Discord mention Tidebinder. The problem I have with the card is against stuff like Sowing Myco Spawn. You hit the cast trigger and you feel good until you realize like you still have to answer the 3/3 on the board. And you might not be able to do that. Tidebinder, stopping a Devourer trigger feels really good, but you're never attacking in with that Tidebinder. So you still have to deal with like the 6/7/7, whatever Devourer is. So I've got Tidebinder pretty low on my list. I think it could have a role to fill. The problem is I don't think that there's any role in current Modern that I wanted to fill. We lost the One Ring. Tidebinder lost a lot of its versatility there. Now it's a little bit slow, a little bit clunky. So yeah, I'm going to put Tidebinder in. I'll put it in role fillers. There's like enough chance something starts getting popularized that you want Tidebinder, but it's really, really low on my role fillers list. We've got Consigned to Memory now. So we've kind of got like triggered abilities covered with a cheaper answer that's got a little more overlap. But Tidebinder could have some situation. Want that. And I think stifling triggered abilities a little less popular than like Spell Pierce's countering a non-creature spell. Trick Bind. Trick Bind. So much text. 1 in a blue, split second, counter target activated or triggered ability. If a permanent ability is countered this way, activated abilities of that permanent can't be activated this turn. So the wording here is very, very important because Trick Bind specifies if a permanent's ability is countered this way, abilities can't be activated. So for things like the new Ugin that has exile something as a cast trigger, if you Trick Bind that, it's a spell that a spell's ability countered this way. So if the Ugin resolves, they can still activate it. You could let the Ugin resolve and find the ability, and they can't do it until end of turn, but then they just do it next turn. Ultimately, Trick Bind just nowhere near enough targets that you're okay wasting a card at effect. I almost feel like I have to put it up with Tail's End, but I can't because Tail's End has more versatility by being able to actually counter some specific type of spell. So I do have it above Trick Bind, but I don't think Trick Bind is a counter spell replaced card. So I'm just going to put it below Invasive Surgery. I'll put it above Invasive Surgery. I think it's worse than Tail's End, but I could probably come up with a deck or two that I want Trick Bind against, especially if we get to more like combo oriented activated ability decks. Like maybe you want Trick Bind against Brood Scale because they go to activate the Brood Scale, you Trick Bind, or they go to equip their into the Blood Chief and you find the equip activation. They can't veil you. They can't do anything like that. So some scenario like that can come up. Then finally, Whirlwind Denial. 2 in a blue. For each spell and ability your opponent controls, counter it unless its controller pays for it. We played this like 3 days ago on stream. And we're talking about additional counters beyond consigned to memory for the Eldrazi matchups. Because if they put a 7 mana Eldrazi on the stack with 7 mana and you Whirlwind Denial, you could hit like Devour Trigger, also would trigger. So the fact that it hits everything on the stack is really cool. It's interesting design. The problem that I saw is obviously you want this effect against cast triggers or big mana spells, things like that. We played against Amulet Titan and we couldn't even counter a Titan with it because they just had 4 mana available. And I'm afraid that's the case with Eldrazi a lot of the times. Is they're just going to have like a couple extra lands, might be able to pay for the Whirlwind Denial. But it's enough text on it that it makes you think there's a chance that it's got a solid possibility of seeing play. We really don't have a lot of options as far as hitting multiple activated or triggered abilities. I think I have to put Whirlwind Denial somewhere around low C, high D. I don't think it's better than Tidebinder, and I don't think it's better than Ceremonious Rejection. So I think I've got to put it right below Rejection. It might have a little more versatility. Pause, you can hit a Myco spawn that's been kicked. Feel pretty good. It probably goes above Rejection because of that. But as like a generic counter, it's really bad. It's 3 mana, a little too expensive for my blood. Once a lot of these colorless decks really start ramping, then they can just pay the 1 and not care. So it's just Mystical Dispute. Mystical Dispute, but 1 more a good amount of the time. So you put 1 thing on the stack, pay 4 for Whirlwind Denial, move on. I had to pay 3 mana to counter. You paid 4 to pay for it. It's not a great resource trade-off. So I think let's rid of that. I think this is my final say on my counter tier list. I feel I was pretty thorough in evaluating each card as they came out, setting where I think they should be. I don't have any qualms with this list. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy. And I hope you enjoyed the video because, as always, like I have a lot of fun discussing through the ideas that kind of come along with breaking down my thought process for cards and evaluating how I feel about them. I think there's a lot of times that we make jerk reactions of like, oh, this card's better or worse than I thought it was or it is because this league I ran it in didn't go well for me. Or I think this card is something that I have to include. I've included up until now. It's been good some amount of the times, but I really want to like get people in the habit of reevaluating constantly, but reevaluating critically. So comparing cards to other possibilities or other potential cards in that same kind of realm. It's really nice to keep you active and engaged in what is working, what isn't working, why certain cards are getting run as opposed to kind of similar, but has some notable difference to it. So if you're liking these kind of videos, these breakdowns of card types, please let me know down in the comments, because like I really enjoy this kind of informative content. Hoping to make a few more videos like this in the future, but I need to know if y'all are feeling the same way, or if you just want to go back to the gameplay scrap. We can always discuss that. But anyway, if you enjoy the content, enjoy the commentary, feel free to leave a like, maybe even consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment down below. Love to hear from you. Other than that, come join the Discord. There's a link down below. We can talk all things Dimir, whether it be Shadow or Frog or Oculus. You can come check out the YouTube, link down to that as well. So if you don't want to miss a live stream, then come drop a follow. We'll let you know when we're live. Other than that, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. I'll catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.